Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today we will discuss the daily edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 7th October 2019. And the articles that we will discuss today have been displayed on your screen. So let us start our discussion. Now, this article on page number 1 talks about the only Indian who will be participating in the largest ever Arctic expedition. And this has been termed as the Mosaic expedition. So this will be important for us from the General Studies paper 2 under the topic International Relations, and can also be important for us from General Studies paper 1 under the topic Resources under World Geography. So in this article, let us try and understand the aims and objectives of this Mosaic expedition, and also what are the interests of India in the Arctic region. And that we have discussed in a previous video. So we will try and revise from that video as to what are the interests of India in the Arctic region. And along with that, we will also learn about the various centers which have been established in Arctic as well as the Antarctic region. Now after that, we will look at a question which was asked in the mains examination in the year 2018 and which was related to the Arctic expedition, and how DNS helped you in answering that question. So this Mosaic expedition will be carried out by a German research vessel which is named as the Polarstern. So this name of this German vessel can be important for us from the preliminary examination point of view. Further, Vishnu Nandam, who is a native of Kerala in India, will be the only Indian amongst the 300 scientists from across the world who will be on board this Mosaic expedition. And regarding this expedition, you should note that it is being spearheaded by the Alfred Wegener Institute of Germany. And it is the largest ever expedition in history. And this will be first to conduct a study of this large scale at the North Pole for an entire year. So previous all studies have been smaller as compared to this Mosaic expedition. And in this Mosaic expedition, Vishnu Nandan will be the only Indian scientist who will be participating. So that is why it becomes important for us, because it is also an event of international and national importance. Now this study of the Mosaic expedition will help us in understanding the impact of climate change and also what are the new opportunities that are coming up in the Arctic region. Now after this, let us try and understand what are the interests of India in the Arctic region and what is the presence of India in that region. Previously in the year 2015, a question was asked based on INDARC, which is also an initiative in the Arctic region. Another similar question was asked in the 2015 with the name Ice Cubes. So under this article, we will try to understand India's presence in the Arctic and the Antarctic region. Now this news article is in news because almost after 3 decades after its first mission to Antarctica, the Indian government is refocusing its priorities to the other pole, that is the Arctic pole. This is because of the opportunities and challenges that have been provided by the climate change. Now for this, India has renamed its National Center for Antarctic and Ocean Research as the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research. So this fact is important for us from prelims point of view. Now further about the National Center for Antarctic and Ocean Research, it has been charged with conducting expeditions to India's base stations in Antarctica since 1998. So India is now refocusing its priorities towards the Arctic region because of the opportunities and challenges provided by the climate change. And for this, the India has renamed the National Center for Antarctic and Ocean Research as the National Center for Polar and Ocean Research. Now India is refocusing on Arctic because of following reasons. The first is that climate change has emerged as a decisive factor in India's rethinking of priorities towards the Arctic Circle. Secondly, sea ice in the Arctic has been melting rapidly because of climate change, and this has been the fastest in this century. Now, due to the melting of ice in the Arctic region, several spots which are rich in hydrocarbon reserves, which are also the centers of fossil fuels, will be more accessible throughout the year via alternative shipping routes. So the melting of ice due to climate change has provided an opportunity to exploit the fossil fuel or the hydrocarbon reserves which were earlier covered under the ice. And due to this climate change, they will now be accessible throughout the year. So this has created an opportunity. So we should understand that although the climate change has disastrous consequences on various parts of the world, it has provided opportunity in the Arctic region. and that is why India is now refocusing on Arctic as well. Now, another important reason for India's focus on Arctic is that India is worried about the impact of melting of sea ice on the monsoon. So India is also concerned with the impact of this melting in the Arctic region and its impact on monsoon. So all these reasons make it important for India to create more observation and stations in the Arctic countries. And this will help us in understanding the impact of climate change and in exploiting the fossil fuels in that region. Now let us understand the current status of India's presence in the Arctic region. Now all these facts are important for us from prelims point of view. The first is that India is an observer member at the Arctic Council. So this is an important fact. Secondly, India has set up an underground observatory called IND-ARC or IND-ARC at the Kongsjorden Fjord, and it is halfway between the Norway and North Pole. Thirdly, India has a research station named Himadri and which is located at the Aleutian Spitsbergen Island in the Norway, and it serves as a hub for India's scientific investigations. Now you can see the location of Aleutian in this map here. It is a part of the Spitsbergen Island of Norway, and it is at this place that the Himadri station is located. So you should learn all these three facts from the prelims point of view. These are: India is an observer member at the Arctic Council. Secondly, India has set up an underground observatory with the name IND-ARC or IND-ARC. And thirdly, India has a scientific research station named Himadri and its location is shown in the map here. Now since India has an observer status in the Arctic Council, let us understand some of the key facts that are related to Arctic Council. Now regarding the objectives and the aims of Arctic Council, it is the leading intergovernmental forum which promotes cooperation, coordination and interaction among the Arctic states, Arctic indigenous communities and other Arctic inhabitants on the common Arctic issues. And in particular, these issues include the sustainable development and environmental protection in the Arctic. Now regarding the permanent members of the Arctic Council, the Ottawa Declaration list. So this declaration's name is important. So this Ottawa Declaration list provides that following are the permanent members of Arctic Council. So names of these countries is important for us. So the permanent members of Arctic Council are Canada, the Kingdom of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, the Russian Federation, Sweden and the United States. So all these countries are permanent members of the Arctic Council. Now these members are permanent members of Arctic Council because only those countries which share their border with the Arctic can become the member of Arctic Council. And since all these countries share their border with the Arctic, they are the permanent member of this council. Further, observer status in the Arctic Council is open to non-Arctic states. That is why India has an observer status in the Arctic Council because it does not have its border with the Arctic region. Now besides the permanent members and observer status members, there is a third category which is called the permanent participants, and it was created to provide for active participation and full consultation with the Arctic indigenous people within the council. Now 6 organizations representing the Arctic indigenous people have a status as permanent participants, and indigenous people are simply those people who have been living there for thousands of years. And these permanent participants include the Aleut International Association, the Arctic Athabaskan Council, Gwich'in Council International, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of North and the Sami Council. So important for us are the names of the permanent members, who all can become the member of Arctic Council, how does a country get observer status, and finally the permanent participants of the Arctic Council. So all these three facts are important for us. Now after learning India's presence in Arctic region, we should also know about India's presence in the Antarctic region. So Dakshin Gangotri was the first Indian base which was established in 1984. However, presently it is only being used as a supply base and transit camp, and it is not an active research facility. Secondly, Maitri was the second permanent station in Antarctica, and it is an active research facility. So the location of Maitri is shown in this map here. Thirdly, Bharti is India's third Antarctic research facility and is one of the 2 active Indian research stations along Maitri. So it is the second active research facility in Antarctic region, and it is located in the Larchman Hills in Antarctica. So this is the location of Bharti. So you should remember the names of these stations, and you should also remember which are India's active research facilities in Antarctica. So Maitri and Bharti are the only active research facilities in Antarctica, and although Dakshin Gangotri was the first Indian base, it is no more an active research center and is only being used as a supply base and transit camp. Now regarding the question that was asked in 2015, the question read, the term IND-ARC sometimes seen in news is the name of. So if you remember all the facts that are related to India's presence in the Arctic region, you will be easily able to answer this question. So the correct answer in this case is D, that is India's underwater observatory to scientifically study the Arctic region and not the Antarctic region. Now the importance of such questions can also be seen from this question that was asked in the year 2015. The question read, in the context of modern scientific research, consider the following statements about Ice Cube, a particular detector located at South Pole, which was recently in the news. And the correct answer in this case was D, that is 1, 2 and 3. That is all the statements were correct, which means it is the world's largest neutrino detector encompassing a cubic kilometer of ice. Secondly, it is a powerful telescope to research for dark matter. And thirdly, it is buried deep in the ice. So remembering key facts about such important research stations or research facilities is important for us from prelims point of view. With this, let us move on to the next article. Now, the question number 5 that was asked in the General Studies paper 1 was related to India's interest in the resources of Arctic region. Now, this question was a part of the geography of our syllabus of paper 1, and in this it was part of the subtopic resources. And you should know that it was a major current affairs in the month of July because a news appeared in the Hindu newspaper. Now, the question which appeared in the exam was related to this news article, which reads India to expand polar research to Arctic as well. And this was covered in the Daily News Simplified of 20th July 2018. Now, an important point that should be noted is that in year 2015, UPSC asked a question in the preliminary examination. And this question read, the term Ind Arc sometimes seen in the news is related to. So the correct answer in this case was D, that is India's underwater observatory to scientifically study the Arctic region. So this gives us an idea that the questions which appear in the preliminary examination give us a clue about the important events which are related to India and questions based on which can be asked in the mains examination. So you can see that in the year 2018 in the paper 1, a question was asked related to India's interest in the resources of Arctic region. Now the question read, why is India taking keen interest in the resources of Arctic? Now this question has been asked in the 10 markers and it required us to write 150 words on this question. So a simple answer structure for this question could have been the introduction, which talks about the impact of climate change and the polar ice melting in Arctic. Secondly, you could have discussed how this melting of ice opens up new opportunities for India. Thirdly, you could have talked about India's presence in the Arctic region. For example, a project named Ind Arc is currently running in the Arctic region. And thirdly, you should draw a map related to the presence of India in the Arctic region, because it is a question related to geography and maps will help you in fetching good marks as compared to others. Now let us have a look at the coverage of India's interest in the Arctic region in the DNS and the Focus magazine. And let us try to bring out some important points which could have been easily used to answer this question. Now in the Daily News Simplified of 20th July 2018, we covered it under why is India refocusing on Arctic. So the points that were covered in this article and which can be used in answering this question are that climate change is a decisive factor in India's rethinking of priorities. Secondly, sea ice at the Arctic has been melting rapidly and this has been the fastest in this century. And this means that several spots which are rich in hydrocarbon reserves, fossil fuels will be more accessible throughout the year via alternative shipping routes. So these are the 2 points in this single point. First is that it will open up new areas for fossil fuels. We know that India is an oil importing nation and new areas which provide us oil security are important for us. And secondly, it will open up alternative shipping routes. Now we know that India has been importing majority of its oil from the Middle Eastern countries, mainly Iraq, Iran, Saudi Arabia, etc. However, the finding of hydrocarbons due to melting in the Arctic region will provide India with new resources. And we all know that India has been working on the international North-South transport corridor. So this North-South transport corridor will further give a boost to the access towards the resources of Arctic region. Now fourthly, India is also worried about the impact of melting of ice on the monsoon. So it has been felt that India needs more observations and stations in the Arctic countries to improve the understanding of the impact of melting of ice on the monsoon. So these are some of the reasons why India has keen interest in the resources of Arctic region. Now you could have also written some facts related to status of India's presence in the Arctic region. So in this line, India is already an observer member of the Arctic Council. India has set up an underground observatory called Ind Arc. And you should know that this aspect was asked in the 2015 prelims examination. Thirdly, Indian Arctic Station in Himadri is located at the Ellison Spitsbergen Island. and it serves as a hub of Indian scientific investigation. So this also gives us another point that India is also interested in the scientific investigations in this region. Now, the issue related to India's interest in the Arctic region has also been covered in the August edition of Focus magazine. And in this, the topic was India's focus on Arctic. And you can see that it shows a map which is related to India's presence in the Arctic. So this point could have been used in answering this question. So this article provides us some key important points which are related to India's interest in the Arctic region. And these points have also been discussed in the Daily News Simplified. So in answering this question, you could have used the points that were mentioned in the DNS and the focus. You could have also drawn a map or two, and you should have thrown light on the India's presence in the Arctic region. And as we know that this was a 10-marker question, so not many points were required to answer this question. Now, this article on page number 10 is related to an ongoing issue, which is the economic slowdown in the Indian economy. Now, this is a recurring theme in the newspapers in the past 2 months, and it has also been covered widely in the previous DNS videos. For example, in the DNS of 27th September 2019, we have discussed in detail the issues with the Indian economy and also how Indian economy can be brought out of this economic slowdown. So similarly, this article also provides certain suggestions for Indian economy to get out of this slowdown. And it mainly focuses on agriculture as a vehicle of growth of future. So you should go through this DNS of 27 September 2019 and try and understand the various suggestions which have been provided in detail to bring the Indian economy out of this slowdown. And in this article, we will try to look at important suggestions which have been provided by the authors. So you can compile all these suggestions and that will be handy for your mains examination answers. Now before that, we know that Indian economy is going through an economic slowdown. And the government has mainly been focusing on supply side measures and has not been focusing on increasing the demand. Now some of the supply side measures include the fiscal stimulus and also the changes in the monetary policy. However, the authors have suggested that to increase the demand in Indian economy, the focus should be on improving the agricultural sector. Further, changes and improvements in the agriculture sector will provide India a long-term growth story. So let us look at what are the important suggestions which have been provided by the authors for the revival of Indian economy. Now, according to various estimates, the Indian agricultural sector is also facing a crisis right now, and which is witnessed in large number of farmer suicides and also decreasing farm incomes. So in this background, the authors have suggested that growth in agriculture sector is critical for India because it will help India in achieving its developmental goals and also help it in achieving the sustainable development goals. Further, improvement in agriculture will be important for achieving the targets of removing poverty and hunger. So what are the suggestions for improving the agricultural sectors and the overall Indian economy? Now, as we know that 50% of population of India is working in the agricultural sector, and also the government has the aim of doubling the farmers' income by 2022. So what is required to achieve this target of doubling the farmers' income by 2022? So to improve the agricultural sector, the authors have suggested that there is a need to ensure reforms on land, market, price and removing the supply side constraints. Now, regarding land reforms, the need of the hour is aggregation of land, and this is mainly required because of bifurcation of land into very small pockets, and this makes these land pockets unviable. So the suggestion is that the government should focus on pooling of land in certain areas, and in this background, the self-help groups can come handy. Also, cooperative sector needs to be promoted in the land leasing market. Now, secondly, regarding marketing reforms, the government has brought out the Model APMC Act or Agriculture Produce Marketing Committees Act. However, not many states have adopted this Model APMC Act, which stands as a barrier for marketing of farm products. Further, MSP reforms are required because the governments are only focusing on 2 to 3 primary crops. For example, the main focus of the governments have been on rice and wheat only. However, this MSP support of the government needs to be diversified. And besides these, there should be a focus on removing the supply side constraints. Now, supply side constraints can refer to timely availability of seeds, also timely availability of credit, and besides this, the transfer of technology to the agricultural sector. Now, at times, the farming sector has also been facing issues of lack of supply of fertilizers on time. So, all these supply side constraints need to be removed. So, these are few suggestions for improving the agricultural sector. Further, there is a need to revisit and reform the regional crop planning and also the agroclimatic zone model to make agriculture an engine of sustainable growth. Now, here it is important to note that regional crop planning is important because the crop distribution or the cropping pattern in India is mainly dependent on agriculture and the physiography of that region. For example, the southern India mainly focuses on rice production. However, parts of northern India focuses on wheat production. Now, along with these main crops, the focus should also be on other supporting crops which can increase the farm incomes. So, there is a need to focus on regional crop planning. And also, such regional crop planning should take into account the agroclimatic model. And this means that water guzzling crops should not be grown in drier areas. For example, sugarcane cultivation in various dry areas is leading to a water crisis. And as such, the salt tolerant and drought tolerant varieties should be promoted in areas which have deficit rainfalls. And such agroclimatic zone planning can be important for dry regions like the Vidarbha and western parts of Rajasthan. Now, the authors have also focused on the issue of job crisis which is being faced in India. And we know that Indian economic growth model has been described as a jobless growth model. So, in this background, the authors have suggested that there is a need to promote occupations which are less influenced by the economic slowdown. And these could include occupations like farming, handlooms, handicrafts, etc. And this is mainly because such sectors are not adversely impacted by economic slowdowns. Further, the authors have analyzed the impact of migration on the consumption expenditure of the laborers. And due to migration, the expenditure patterns of the people are affected. So, people who are migrating from one place to another are not able to spend more. And that is why the authors have suggested that there is a need for in situ employment creation, which is important for a stable income and spending by the people. Now, the in situ employment creation means there should be focus on job creation in areas where the people are residing. And it should not involve migration of people from one place to another in search of jobs. And ultimately, the need of the hour is an accurate picture of unemployment data because if the unemployment data is lacking, the policy formation for the job creation will always be unsuccessful. And we know that recently the PLFS survey was released, which is the Periodic Labor Force Survey. However, this report was delayed for 6 months by the government of India. And that has led to an important crisis which is known as the job crisis and which is ultimately leading to a slowdown in the Indian economy. So had this PLFS data been released on time, it would have helped the government in formulating a policy for fighting the job crisis in India. So these are few suggestions which have been provided by the authors for improving the Indian economy, especially the agriculture sector and the job scenario. And that is how they aim at bringing the Indian economy out of a slowdown. And besides these suggestions, you should also go through the previous video of 27th September 2019 to understand the other suggestions for fighting the economic slowdown. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 11 and the editorial on page number 10 have been written in the context of the imposition of sedition charges on 49 eminent persons who had written an open letter to the Prime Minister expressing the concerns over mob lynching, etc. And in this background, this editorial and the article highlights that the judiciary should not be used for political purposes, especially in the cases of sedition. So in this article, we'll try and understand the historical background of the sedition law and also what are the observations of Law Commission on the issue of sedition. Further, we will look at the Supreme Court's observation on the sedition law. And this has mainly been in news because this sedition law is being used to curb the freedom of expression guaranteed to the citizen of India under the Constitution's Article 19. So this will form a part of the General Studies paper 2 under the topic Constitution, etc. Now first let us look at the history of this sedition law. So this was first enacted in 17th century in England. And it was enacted because the lawmakers in England used to think that any criticism of the government would be detrimental to the government of the day and the monarchy. And that is why the criticism of the government was to be silenced. And in this background, this law was borrowed and inserted into the Indian Penal Code in 1870. So the offence of sedition was provided under the section 124A of Indian Penal Code, which was created or enacted during the British times. Now the first Indian to be prosecuted under this section 124A was Bal Gangadhar Tilak. And when Bal Gangadhar Tilak was tried for sedition, amendments were made to the section 124A which deals with the sedition. And two important words were added which included hatred and contempt to disaffection, which was defined to include disloyalty and feeling of enmity. And especially these provisions have been the most misused ones. Further, even Mahatma Gandhi was tried under the sedition law, and he was tried for his articles in the Young India. Further, during the Constituent Assembly debates, an attempt was made to incorporate the sedition into the Indian Constitution to restrict the freedom of speech. However, this move was opposed by first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru. This is mainly because it would have restricted the freedom of speech and expression, which are the fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution. And this sedition under the Indian Penal Code under section 124A has been defined in a manner which curbs the freedom of expression. And sedition under this law has been defined as whoever by words or by written communication tries to incite disaffection towards the government can be punished with imprisonment for life. And also fine and other kinds of imprisonments can be imposed. So by charging any criticism of the government as an attempt to excite hatred and contempt towards the government of India, the governments can misuse this law. And that is why it has been in news and has been criticized by various sections. So in this regard, let us look at the observations of the Supreme Court on the issue of sedition in its various cases. Now these three famous cases in the Supreme Court highlight the observations of the Supreme Court on this sedition law. So in the Romesh Thapar versus the State of Madras, the Supreme Court observed that any act of freedom of speech and expression, if it threatens the security of the state or it tends to overthrow the state, no reasonable restrictions can be imposed on such acts of speech or expression. Which simply means that restrictions can be imposed on freedom of speech and expression only when such speech and expression tends to threaten the security of the state or it tends to overthrow the state itself. Otherwise, no restrictions can be imposed on such acts of speech and expression. And similarly, in the Kedarnath versus the State of Bihar case in the 1962, a constitutional bench had ruled in the favor of constitutional validity of section 124A of the IPC. And in this case, the Supreme Court had observed that a person can be prosecuted for sedition only if his acts lead to incitement to violence or has a tendency to create public disorder, etc. Otherwise, any act of freedom of expression cannot be included under the Sedition Act. And similar observations were provided by the Supreme Court in the Balwant Singh versus the State of Punjab case. And even in this case, the Supreme Court had acquitted the persons who were shouting pro-Khalistani slogans. This was mainly because such slogans did not incite any violence. So thus the Supreme Court's observations reflect that the sedition law cannot be imposed unless such acts threaten the state itself or they threaten the security of the state or the country. So these Supreme Court's observations act as safeguard against the misuse of sedition law. However, many lower courts have been ignoring the Supreme Court's observations on the sedition laws. And because of such ignorance of the lower courts, FIRs are being filed against people who are criticizing the government of the day, and which has happened recently in the case of Bihar. Now, after this, let us look at the Law Commission's observation on this sedition law. So, it has observed that dissent and criticism of the government are essential ingredients of a vibrant democracy. And further, right to criticize one's own history has been protected under the freedom of speech and expression under Article 19 of the Indian Constitution. Further, the Law Commission has highlighted the misuse of the sedition law against the freedom of expression. And it has observed that although it is essential to protect national integrity, the sedition law should not be misused to curb the freedom of speech and expression. Now further, this law was introduced during the British times, and as such it is a colonial law. So in this background, the Law Commission has questioned the colonial provision of sedition in India, and that too when the British government has already abolished the sedition law in their own country. So continuation of a colonial law which has been removed in the Britain itself does not stand the test of the times. And finally, the Law Commission has observed that for merely expressing a thought which is not in consonance or agreement with the policy of the government of the day, a person should not be charged under the provision of the sedition. So these are the suggestions which can be reused in writing answers related to the sedition law. And this is mainly because it is an observation of the Law Commission which is created by the government itself. And it has warned and cautioned against the misuse of sedition law by the governments. So in short, there is a need to differentiate between strong criticism of the government and incitement to violence or threatening the security of the state. And that is why sedition law should not be misused by the governments of the day, and especially for curbing the freedom of speech and expression of the public at large. So these are few aspects of the sedition law in India, its historical background, the observations of the Supreme Court and the Law Commission in this regard. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 13 talks about India's decision to share the maritime security and safety information with its newly established Information Fusion Center, Indian Ocean Region, or the IFC-IOR, with the countries which surround the Indian Ocean region. So, in this article, let us try and understand key facts related to the Information Fusion Center for IOR, and also why is the security of the Indian Ocean region important. So this will fall under General Studies paper 3 under the topic security. Now India is trying to emerge as the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region. And that is mainly because India lies at a strategic position in the Indian Ocean region. And to become the net security provider in the Indian Ocean region, India has been taking various steps. For example, it is trying to improve the maritime domain awareness and has also developed the Coastal Surveillance Radar Network, or the CSRN network. Further, India has also deployed the radar systems in Seychelles, Mauritius, Sri Lanka, and also recently in the Maldives. And all these are neighboring countries present in the Indian Ocean region. And as a continuation to this, India has also established this Information Fusion Center for Indian Ocean region. So in this background, let us try and understand some facts related to the Information Fusion Center, or the IFC-IOR. So this Information Fusion Center is established as a real-time maritime information sharing hub for Indian Ocean region. So it will share almost all information related to the Indian Ocean region in a real-time manner. And to give effect to this, IFC-IOR has built about 15 multinational maritime security centers in collaboration with 18 countries of the IOR region. And it also aims to keep track of both the conventional as well as unconventional threats in the Indian Ocean region. And it will mainly focus on straits and locations of strategic importance for India. For example, Persian Gulf is important for India as far as its oil imports are concerned. And also Malacca Strait, which is known as one of the important strategic choke points in the Indian Ocean region. So it will also monitor information related to this Malacca Strait. So this IFC IOR center wants to keep a track of almost all types of informations and threats in the Indian Ocean region. And this IFC IOR is helping India in collating shipping data, also dissemination of maritime security and safety information. And India has now extended this information sharing from the IFC IOR with other countries surrounding the Indian Ocean region. For example, India is now sharing this information with Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and other Southeast Asian countries. Now, in this background, let us look at the need for monitoring the Indian Ocean region, or why is the Indian Ocean region important for India, and why is India extending such information to other countries of the Indian Ocean region. Now, why is India interested in monitoring this Indian Ocean region? Now, this Indian Ocean region is a significant geopolitical theater, and India wants to increase its strategic influence in the Indian Ocean region by the virtue of its location at the head of this ocean. Now, as we know that in the Indian Ocean region, China is trying to increase its influence, and it is trying to do so by creating and undertaking various ports like the Gwadar port in Pakistan and the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka. And this policy of China of surrounding India has been termed as the string of pearls policy. Now, as China is trying to pursue this string of pearls policy, India is trying to counter this by monitoring and engaging with multiple stakeholders in the Indian Ocean region. So one of the ways in which India is trying to increase its strategic influence and countering China is that India is trying to monitor the IOR region with this newly created center. Further, Indian Ocean region is extremely important because 2/3 of the global oil passes through this region, and half of the container traffic and 1/3 global cargo passes through this Indian Ocean region. And this region is also important because important strategic choke points like the Malacca Strait lie in this Indian Ocean region, which are extremely important and connecting points for the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. Now, Malacca Strait is extremely important for China because most of its cargo and oil passes through this Malacca Strait. And that is why India is trying to monitor this Malacca Strait through its information center. Now, also the Indian Ocean region faces the problems of maritime terrorism, piracy, and contraband trafficking. And that is why India is aiming at controlling and monitoring this Indian Ocean region and is trying to increase its influence. And also India realizes that as the Indian Ocean region is facing grave challenges because of terrorism, piracy, etc., it is not possible for any single nation to individually monitor the oceans. And that is why it is indulging with multiple stakeholders in the Indian Ocean region. So this is the strategic importance of Indian Ocean region for India, and why is India trying to monitor the information in the IOR region. With this, let's take up the next article. Now, this article on page number 12 is in news because the finance minister will be inaugurating the National E-Assessment Center in New Delhi. And in the budget of 2019 and 20, the government had announced the National E-Assessment Scheme in order to facilitate faceless assessment and scrutiny of income tax. So in this background, let us understand key aspects of the National E-Assessment Scheme, what are its salient features, and what is its main objective and aim. So this will fall under General Studies paper 3 under the topic Economic Development because it aims at reducing the corruption in the tax administration, and also it aims at curbing the problem of corruption in the income tax department. Now, this National E-Assessment Scheme was launched in the budget of 2019 and 20. And this was mainly launched because of the increasing corruption in the tax administration in India. And this was because it involved human discretion. So this new National E-Assessment Scheme aims at facilitating faceless assessment and scrutiny of the income tax. And under this, the government of India has launched a new process for the assessment of income tax. Now, what is this new process about? So under this new system, the assessment of income tax is assigned to an assessing officer on a random manner, and it is being done by an automated system at the National E-Assessment Center. So this system makes the assessment system a faceless system because the assessment of income tax will now be assigned randomly to the income tax officials. And in addition to the random allotment of the tax assessment to the tax officials, it also aims that all the communications between the taxpayers and the assessing officers will be done through a national e-assessment center which has been established for the same purpose. Now, what is the likely impact of establishing such a national e-assessment center and the impact of this scheme? Now, one of the important impact will be that now the taxpayers cannot influence the assessing officers, and also the assessing officers cannot influence the taxpayers. And that is how it aims at eliminating the corruption involved because of discretion of the human interface. So by making the allotment of assessment random, and also by making the communication between the taxpayers and the assessing officials through the National E-Assessment Center, the government is trying to avoid the human discretion in the cases of tax assessments. And that is how it aims at reducing the corruption in tax administration. Further, this scheme also aims at removing the jurisdictional system of tax assessment. This is because now the tax assessment will be allotted randomly. And that is how the government aims at bringing transparency and also promoting the ease of doing business, which is important for India's economic growth. So these were a few aspects of the National E-Assessment Scheme. And with this, let's take up the next article. Now, after today's discussion, you should try and answer these questions, and the answer will be displayed after 5 seconds. So the first question reads, which of the following is or are India's permanent stations in Antarctica? First is Maitri, second is Bharti, and third is Himadri. So as we know that Himadri is India's permanent station in Arctic. So the third one is wrong. Hence the correct answer is B, that is 1 and 2 only. Second question reads, consider the following statements. Any country can become member of the Arctic Council, which is incorrect because only the surrounding countries of the Arctic can become the members. And that is why India has been accorded an observer status. Secondly, 6 organizations representing Arctic indigenous people have permanent members of Arctic Council, which is correct. So the correct answer is B, that is 2 only. Now these 2 questions have been taken from previous year preliminary examinations, and the first is which of the following are kharif crops. So as we know that wheat is a rabi crop, so you can easily eliminate A and D, and the correct answer that comes out is C because cotton, groundnut and rice are kharif crops in India. The next question reads, consider the following statements. Arunachal Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh and Mizoram, and in which of the above states do tropical wet evergreen forests occur? So as you might be knowing that the tropical wet evergreen forests are absent in the western Himalayas. And these include the states of Jammu and Kashmir and Himachal Pradesh. So that is why you can eliminate second option. Thus the correct answer is 1 and 3 only, that is C. With this we conclude today's discussion, and there's an announcement that there will be no DNS tomorrow. This is because The Hindu will not be published tomorrow as mentioned on the first page of today's newspaper. So the next DNS will be on evening of 9th October. With this, let's take up the question for the day.